Hello and welcome. I am Exit Light and this is my channel. Before we get started with today's story, if you would please give this video a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. If you are not subscribed and you would like to be, please do so. And if you'd like to be notified when my content goes live, please click that bell. You'll notice that there are two choices now: to be notified every time or to never be notified. Please click until you get the choice you'd like. Alright, let's get into today's story. So, in keeping with the Campfire Story theme, let me tell you the story my grandfather told me years ago, before he passed. Come closer. Closer. Listen to the fire crackle. See the dark sky. It's clear. Not a cloud to be seen. The stars shining bright. The half moon showing just enough light to have the shadows of the night cast on the trees around us. The fire casting her flames against the forest. Coyotes howl, frogs croaking, crickets rubbing their legs together to add their music to the dark symphony of the dark forest night. The twigs that snap, the leaves that crunch, the eyes shining in the firelight. My papa called Little John back then 'cause his daddy was Big John, and his best friend, who they called Dog Leg 'cause his leg had grown funny and was bent, were always getting into trouble one way or another. Papa's own Mima used to call him Huck Finn, like from the book. She always said that he was their very own Huck Finn, that if you was looking for trouble, just follow Little John, and that's where trouble was. So, when the two of them was 16, they was getting ready to join up in the military. Before they left, they had one thing they'd always been afraid to do, and they decided that it was a good time as any to shake off that fear, since they was going to be men soon and have responsibilities and such. One day, the two got a tent and all their camping gear together and set out towards the Holler family farm. Now, the Holler family grew corn and raised pigs, but behind their cornfields was a forest, thick and dark. Couldn't hardly see the sky from inside, they'd been told. Legend had it that one of the Holler boys just wasn't right in his head. His mama had labored for 3 days, and when he was born, he had the face of a monster. But she still loved him. She would carry him to the grocer in town, but people would point and stare at him. When he got to be about 3 years old, they realized that he was different and wasn't keeping up with his age. But his mama treasured him, and she took real good care of him too, his whole life. And then she got ill and passed on. The boy, now a young man, was kicked out of the house when his daddy took a new wife. He didn't want him scaring her away, so he built a small cabin in the woods and put a "Do Not Enter" sign nailed to a tree on the edge of the forest. The daddy would bring him food. Then the daddy grew old and he died, and there was no one who knew that he was living out there in the old Holler forest. But there came the legend of the Holler Man, and it was said that anyone who dared wander in the woods would be killed by the holler man. That the sign is rewritten in blood every time it happens. That there are tons of unsolved disappearances and murders. And even the police won't search the holler place. They are all local boys and had grown up hearing the same stories my pawpaw had. So the two of them, Little John and Dogleg, had set up their camp and left to come back that night. Both coming and going, they walked past the sign that read, "Do not enter." It looked like someone had dipped 2 fingers in the dark brown and red tinted paint. It looked thick, too, like mud. The nail holding it to the giant tree was rusted, and the rust was running down the sign. It looked like the sign had once been white, but now it was gray, cracking at the edges of the wood. The 2 boys made a plan to meet up at the tent at 10 p.m. My pawpaw, Little John, drove his daddy's beat-up old pickup truck to the edge of the forest that night and parked next to the "Do Not Enter" sign. It was their agreed-upon site to park. They'd counted their steps to and from the tent 3 times and noted right and left turns. It was dark, and even knowing that this all was scary, they knew the legend wasn't true. It was just an old wives' tale. Still, one wouldn't want to get lost in the density of these woods. Old as time they were. These trees stretching towards the sky. The younger trees breaking their way through to get some sun. Dense, and not without its perils. Apart from no one being able to find you out here, there were bound to be animals on the hunt. Little John got out his flashlight, some extra batteries, water, and some sandwiches he'd thrown together, and his rifle. He'd been hunting before, lots. Thought it might come in handy to scare off an animal if need be. Figured that he'd probably fall asleep soon, though. But at least he could tell the story of spending the night in the old holler woods. Little John found the tent in a small clearing. He started the fire in the pit they'd dug earlier and sat on a log, waiting for Dogleg. Time seemed to be moving slowly. The woods were full of strange sounds, howling and coyote calls that sound a little bit like a strange bird chirping. He began to hear every noise until it was nearly deafening. "Dogleg!" he yelled out into the darkness, the moon's light poking through the tops of the trees just enough to play tricks with the eyes. "Dogleg, you out there?" An hour had passed, and his friend hadn't shown up. It was unlike him. He was always very stringent about time, and very neat and tidy. In fact, my pawpaw said that everyone thought that Dogleg would thrive in the military. Little John listened for a reply. There was nothing. Could he have gotten lost, he wondered, but he knew that his friend wouldn't get lost. He knew that Dogleg knew exactly how many turns there were and exactly how many steps. Little John decided to get into the tent as the air suddenly turned unseasonably cold. He stoked the fire, added a couple of logs, and settled in, grabbed a sandwich. The fresh air quickly put him to sleep. He wasn't sure for how long before something woke him up, startled him from a deep sleep. He couldn't even remember what it was, just that his entire body reacted, and he sat straight up, straining his ears to hear. "Hello?" he called out. "Dogleg? That you?" he asked. Nothing. Then, suddenly, a noise, he said, he'd never forget. Not a scream exactly, but a guttural crying out. He said it sounded like something straight from hell. Something so full of fear and pain that he couldn't imagine it coming from an animal. And then the snapping of twigs, crunching of leaves. My pawpaw cocked his rifle, ready to shoot just in case, but also afraid that maybe it was his friend playing a joke on him. A sick joke. And shooting blindly from inside the tent could hurt or even kill him. "Dogleg," he whispered. "Is that you? I mean it. I'm gonna shoot if you don't name yourself. Whoever or whatever you are. This isn't funny. Now stop acting like a child. You're gonna get yourself hurt." Then he heard a muffled something. Voice? Cry? An animal? A person? He just didn't know. The woods suddenly became still, and Little John was listening intently into the darkness. He turned his flashlight on, figuring that it might scare away an animal. Something brushed against the tent. "Dogleg," whispered my pawpaw. "That you? Now you're making me real mad now." Again a noise. It sounded like a gurgling noise. "I'm gonna shoot," called out Little John. And swoosh, the fire went dead. Someone had poured water on it. Little John could hear some sizzling still when he aimed his rifle towards where the fire had been and pulled the trigger once, twice. He listened and never heard anything again. He sat up awake all night long. First light came, but my pawpaw wasn't going to leave that tent until it was full bright as it could get in those woods. Finally, he grabbed his rifle sometime around noon and pulled back the flap at the entrance of the tent. He couldn't see nothing except the wet ashes from the fire. He crawled out slowly, not knowing if he should be scared or real angry. He stood himself up. He looked around, and that's when he saw the worst thing he ever did see. There, before him, was Dogleg, his clothes real bloody, both legs clean gone, his face beaten black and blue, nailed to a tree, with the long nail going straight through his chest, where there was also a bullet hole. And nailed above that, the old gray sign. The writing, 2 fingers had written in dark red blood, "Do not enter."